Welcome to Gracefully Graying. I'm your host, attorney Henry Gornbein. Please watch our Gracefully Graying YouTube channel and like and watch our gracefullygraying.com site. Today on Gracefully Graying, I'm pleased to welcome two friends who we can call Sheldon Larky, who's in blue, representing the Democratic position, Mr. Democrat, and Rich Poling, Mr. Republican in red, appropriately the red states and the blue states. We're here to postmortem the election that just transpired. And so I welcome both of you, and I'll start with you, Rich. We survived the election. We're moving forward in some fashion, I hope. And you predicted in September that Peters would lose in Michigan to James. Your thoughts on that?
Well, I was surprised, not shocked. I think credit goes to the Democrats for having a better ground game early, particularly with the absentee. What's ironic is for the first time that I can recall since 1990, when Governor Engler beat incumbent Governor Blanchard, almost to the vote, the difference was Oakland County. And the key thing here that I think is surprising for Mr. James, who is an African-American, is that he lost big in the African-Americans. The communities that are primarily African-American and statewide. And I think that's where the real surprise is. But also the fact that Oakland County was such a pivotal difference in this election.
Okay, Sheldon, your thoughts on the U.S. Senate race in Michigan? Point to clarify, my understanding, James still hasn't conceded, so.
All right, well, neither has the president conceded as of today, as of production day today. He doesn't have to concede. There's no reason that anybody has to concede. It's interesting because when we did this in September, I thought that James was going to win. I thought his ads were extremely effective, but I think the difference was the absentee ballots. Throughout the entire state of Michigan, Democrats were able to bolster the absentee ballot situation. And as a result of it, they took substantial leads statewide in various races. I agree with Rich. If you look at the numbers, Black communities did not support the Black candidate. He wasn't repulsed, but he did not succeed in getting the majority of the Black community. And I was somewhat surprised because I thought for sure James would win because he certainly had much better ads and much better quality ads. And he distanced himself from Trump.
Henry, what's interesting is that we can even see that here in southwest Oakland County is that, to Shell's point, is that the absentee ballots made a difference in the state rep seat down here and also in the county commission seat in Novi. The absentees went dramatically Democratic.
Rich, now let's go to Oakland County. And for the first time that I can remember, we now have a county executive who's a Democrat. And
elected. Because he's been in office for a while, and there were actually two elections, one to finish Brooks's term and the other was for his own term. Yeah, Oakland County really didn't surprise me. I was glad to see what happened in the Oakland County Circuit Court seat. Is my grandfather, Sheldon Larky, was glad to see, I'm sure, for his daughter-in-law that he thinks the world of and who I have a high amount of respect for. She was a great referee, and I think she's did very well. And I know we're going to talk about it a little later. The only race that was of interest on the countywide basis that was a little closer than I expect was the county treasurer, but that was the only one where we didn't have an incumbent either. Kent lost to Robert Wittenberg. So, and then on the county commission races, I thought Moss was going to have a hard time winning. He actually won by 1,500 votes. I thought Burns had a very good chance of beating Kuhn. He came within 1,350, but didn't make it. And I thought Kessler had a good chance of beating Nelson, but there was 605 votes differential there out of almost 35,000 cast in that seat. And that's one that I understand. I believe there's an active recount going, but I didn't know it got completed. And Rich, I suspect it did since the board canvassers approved.
Sheldon,
surprisingly, the in-person votes throughout the entire county favored the Republicans. The absentee votes were the difference for the Democrats this year, substantially in every single race. It was the absentee votes that carried the Democrats into office. It was not the in-person votes.
What was interesting is, I don't know if you heard what happened out in the commission seat where Adam Korkendorfer is the incumbent. He originally lost by 127 votes, and an hour later it was reversed because counts had been, or some precincts had been double counted. So,
well, let me address this question to both of you. I mean, you had President Trump, and I'll first throw it at you, Rich, saying that you cannot trust absentee balloting, you got to vote in person, and was really tweeting like crazy against absentee balloting. Do you think that hurt the Republicans?
I don't think it's a matter of hurting. I think it's a matter that the Dems did a much better ground game in terms of getting the absentee ballots out and filled in and back into the voting places. It was much, much more important. So I don't want to say hurt. I think the Dems in Michigan did a better ground game.
Sheldon, your thoughts on that?
I agree. I mean, look at Colorado. Colorado has been doing mail-in voting for, I think, 14 years. There's never been a fraud situation there. I don't think President Trump dissuaded or assisted anything by talking about the absentee ballots being fraudulent. It did nothing. Actually, probably, let me go back a step. It probably energized the Democrats. It probably energized the Democrats because I think they were insulted that they didn't think that their vote would count. And so that they got out and got out early.
Yeah, but I think it's more than, I've always been in favor of no reason absentee ballot because I think people need to vote and anything that would encourage people to vote. One of the key issues obviously was President Trump himself, and I think that hurt Republicans, and I think it hurt here in Michigan and to a great extent here in Oakland County. But I think it was majorly an issue of in one, his attitude about COVID, two, more importantly, his basic personality in terms of, his role in terms of polarizing people, and his negativity towards people who disagreed with him. And to come up and say absentee ballots are the reason is, historically Republicans have done better, in this county in particular, in absentee ballots.
I have another question. That is, here's kind of my thought, and that is, he's been one of the most controversial presidents that I can recall. But my prediction is, or belief is, that if there had not been COVID, he would have been reelected. What are your thoughts on that, Rich, first of all?
I'm not sure I agree or disagree with that. I mean, yeah, I think it gave people an opportunity to have time to do an absentee ballot, fill out the application if they wanted to. But there are too many other things to go on. In some states, COVID was a deciding factor. In Michigan, I don't necessarily, I don't agree with it, because I look at some of the traditional Republican areas, ones that, in the center part of the county, Birmingham, Bloomfield, for example, and Township, and where you look at Chuck Moss, won that seat, when you look at how the votes went for the president, they didn't go that way. For the first time in my lifetime, a Democrat was elected supervisor Bloomfield Township. So I think a woman still had an advantage in this election, and to some extent, particularly in this county. But more importantly, I just don't see COVID being as big a factor here as in other places in the country. I think it was much more his personality. He was not able to hold the moderate Republican, and particularly female voting Republican in this election.
Well, he alienated women in general.
But I think a lot of that predated him even being president. I don't think it necessarily transitioned. He certainly didn't do anything to improve his relationship to them. I would agree.
And when I posed the question, I was thinking of nationwide rather than just Michigan. I think Michigan is different because he flipped it by 15,000 votes in 2016, whereas I think he's down by 154,000 votes in this election. So there's a big swing.
Well, but that's a turnout. And that goes again, give the Dems credit for getting the ground game and doing a better job in the ground game than we did here.
So the Democrats did a better job on turnout, is what you're saying in essence.
Yes. Particularly in the Tri-County area.
Now that we have the transition period beginning, Sheldon, do you think that it'll go forward smoothly? Or do you think there are going to be a lot of potholes in the road between now and January?
Today you're taping this on November 24th, 2020, and President-elect Biden announced a number of his cabinet appointees and one special appointee. Already in today's Wall Street Journal, the lead editorial is already going after John Kerry for his thought process, being the climate change ambassador. So from the standpoint internally, I think it's going to be fine. From the standpoint of the government agencies assisting in the Biden transition team, I don't think there's going to be major problems. I think the bureaucrats are going to do what is necessary to assist it in transitioning from one administration to the other. But there will be potholes. There will be a lot of people challenging the appointees for the cabinet posts. I just don't see that going to be as smooth as everyone thinks it's going to be.
Well, they're always. And Rich, your thoughts?
Well, I absolutely agree with Michelle in terms of, the basic transition will be okay. It's the question of whether or not the election is in effect over. I mean, I think it is, because I don't think the vote differential is too big to change it. But when you look and see what happened in Nevada, and you have, 80,000 more votes than you have ballots in hand. Georgia was only, I believe, 12,000 votes differential. You're going to have an issue that's going to be raised in the courts with Pennsylvania. By itself, those aren't enough to change the outcome. Okay. And I'm afraid that this open outcome is disconcerting, because it doesn't allow us to, quote unquote, transition into January and the next president taking office, the president-elect, as I view it, take office. And then I agree with Shell. I think there's going to be some battles over some of the nominees, and John Kerry is going to be certainly controversial.
Sheldon, why are the pollsters so wrong again?
They didn't call the Republicans. The Republicans must not have landlines, or they didn't want to let it be known who they were voting for. Pollsters had it wrong. simply because they were doing landline calls and not mobile calls, and a lot of Republicans were very honestly hesitant to say that they were Republicans. It was interesting that there was almost like a unintentional backlash by many people to say, well, I'm not voting Republican or I'm voting Republican. So the pollsters really didn't get a good grasp of their communities that they were serving.
Rich, your take on the pollsters?
Well, I think we have to look at a little historical context, and I don't disagree with Shel. Is the first time we really saw this in Michigan was in 2002 when Granholm beat Posthumous. The weekend before was the Michigan State game in Ann Arbor, and I ran into all the major pollsters and asked them all personally what they thought was going to happen, and they all said, you know, it's going to be a 12 to 15% victory for Granholm. It was just over 3%. And when confronting them sometime later, asking them, all of them, two of whom were Democrats, by the way, what was the explanation, they initially didn't have an answer. And as we've seen this over time, Shel's right. They're still using landlines. The second part of it, though, is more and more people do not want to be labeled, and so they're not participating in polling. I have refused to participate in polls for over a decade because I don't want the label, not internally within the party nor necessarily outside the party. And more people aren't doing that. And I think the younger people are particularly of that mindset. And you're going to see that differential growth. If we remember, Shel, you correct me, wasn't it 2009 when the TV stations were predicting that the Detroit mayor was going to lose, and the only one that was right was Kisner, because he held off because he was doing in-person interviews, not just phone interviews.
You're correct.
And he was the one that told, I think it was Channel 4 was his station, don't predict yet, don't announce. And, you know, Kirkpatrick came back and ended up winning. I think it was 2009.
Correct.
Yeah. And so, yeah, people are just don't want to have anything to do with surveys. The other thing that's interesting is that when you talk to a lot of the campaign advisors, you know, get the big bucks, they're saying we're relying more and more on consumer data for prediction. They find it more reliable.
Sheldon, do you think there will be more civility in Congress beginning with the new administration, or is gridlock going to continue?
I believe there'll be more civility. It'll take time. It'll be a shakeout time. The Democrats, to be point blank, if they play it smart, they won't allow the progressives to speak as loud as they have in their first terms and calm them down. I believe that I think that the country is demanding from both sides that more civility, because if it doesn't start with our politicians, it's going to have an adverse effect on our society.
Rich, your comments on that same topic?
Unless there's a change in leadership in the House, I don't see we getting much of anywhere with civility on that end. In the House or in the Senate, it could be likely, but I think it would be better if there was a change there in leadership as well. But a lot of it will be the president-elect's attitude, what he and his vice president, how they want to approach some of the things. But I agree with Shel's overall comment that the progressives have got to be a little bit more moderate in terms of their vitrioli. There's what they say out in the public, but there remains to be seen. In the short term, I don't think it'll happen until after the inauguration.
I just saw a breaking news clip. Pennsylvania Secretary of State certified the election for the Democrats. So that just came through as we're talking.
Yeah, but that's not the problem. The problem is the judge's order at the trial court level. And if that is overturned, there will be a large number of ballots that will be thrown out.
Well,
and also the Pennsylvania Supreme Court rebuffed already one Republican challenge so far. Yeah. But I agree with Rich. There's still a Superior Court decision that may go up.
Because the U.S. Supreme Court elected not to get involved in overturning the trial judge's preliminary ruling. And therein lies the problem.
Well, my guess is they're not going to get involved. I don't think it'll go that far.
I disagree. I think it will.
But will they take it?
Yeah, I think they will. And I think they will take it sooner than later. But the thing is that Pennsylvania doesn't change the outcome. It only changes the outcome for Pennsylvania as the presidential component of it. I don't know how it'll impact other things in terms of congressional seats or the. Did they have a Senate seat? I don't even remember this year.
I don't think there was a Senate seat.
I don't think there was either. So I think it could impact a couple of congressional seats, maybe, but the presidential. But even if you move those electoral votes to Trump, it doesn't change the overall outcome.
Rich, what is the major reason why you think Trump lost the election?
Well, as I said before, it's number one, it's his personality, his alienation of people, particularly women, the educated, successful women. And you know, when we're hearing that from some people across the country that COVID was a major factor in terms of his initial attitude. I'm not worried about it's fake and all that kind of stuff.
Sheldon, your comments.
I think his narcissism, I think his attitude was there. To be honest with you, the Democrats were ready. If in fact COVID-19 did not come into play, the Democrats were ready to use their advertising dollars and their backgrounds on talking about his whole attitude towards life and his dalliances and all of the things regarding his personality. They would have gone after a personality clash. Trump's trump card was the economy. I mean, that was his best trump card. But the Democrats were ready. If COVID-19 did not happen, frankly, I think he would have been in better shape, much better shape, because more people would have probably gone out to live voting than absentee. That would have had some major impacts throughout various areas of the country. But it was his attitude. COVID was a factor. It wasn't the big factor. It was him. It's going to be interesting to see who the Republicans are going to put as the titular head of the Republican Party from 20 to 24. Will they dump Trump as the titular head?
Well, that's the next question. I'll go to you, Rick.
Just real quick, do you think, Shell, that COVID was a factor in Michigan?
No, Whitmer was a factor in Michigan, not COVID.
Yeah, that's what's going to be interesting in 2 years.
Rich, will Trump continue to rule the Republican Party going forward?
Well, theoretically, he has the right to name who's going to be the executive director of the National Party. Will he or won't he? That will be an interesting question. I mean, everybody's lining up as who's going to be, you know, the nominee in 4 years, and whether it be Pence, will it be Nikki Haley? But you also have the issue that's already popping up for governorship in 2 years. That's where things will be a little bit more interesting.
Shell, your thoughts on that?
I think Trump will not be the titular head. I think that the Republican Party will probably try to dump him. I don't think they're going to hold on to him. He'll yell, scream, and shout, but he'll go back to his businesses, and the Republicans will find somebody who could be more mainline, like a Nikki Haley, who has a great deal of respect among the Democrats.
Shell, what are the next steps for the Democrats? Speaking of Democrats,
the statewide or nationally?
Both.
Statewide, the Democrats have got a problem. Rick hit it right in the nose. Gretchen Whitmer may be one of the most hated one of the most hated governors for what she's done throughout the state. Although the statistics say that people agreed with her attitude, there's a strong backlash. So the Democrats are going to have to shore her up for the next 2 years. From the standpoint of Congress, it'll be interesting to see what happens with the Georgia Senate race. If the Georgia Senate race does not, if 2 Democrats win there, and of course the Democrats now have the majority in the Senate, I'll take that back. It'll be a 50-50.
The vice president breaks the tie.
Right. It'll be 50-50. If the Democrats have to shore up local politics, they lost in congressional seats. We did not do well in congressional seats, and we didn't do well in the state house. So the Democrats have a major problem in the next 2 years.
Sheldon,
I agree with Sheldon absolutely. The other thing is that some of the union leadership is very, very upset with her, what she did in April with the extension of the no work order. And the best thing I think that could happen to the Dems post in Washington for the president-elect, because then they can get rid of that negativity that she's bringing to the Democratic election process in 2 years.
Well, let's go to that. I mean, do you think that Biden, and that's one of his goals, will be able to tone down the rhetoric and get people to start communicating again? Rich, you're first on that, and then Sheldon.
Biden's not the one I worry about. It's the vice president. Can she? I think the president himself could, yes.
Do you think there's going to be you think there's a backlash against Kamala Harris? Is that
no. I think she can continue the rhetoric. The issue is will she be doing that, or will she be taking and letting Biden be the primary speaker? I think that's the issue. I mean, hey, she's already twice said publicly it's her administration. But
Sheldon, your thoughts?
If he were smart, he would be the spokesman. He would keep Kamala in the ceremonial roles, tell her to keep her mouth shut, but still work her magic with fellow and sister Democrats and some of the Republicans in the Senate. She can be a tempering situation, but she has to remain quiet. I agree with Rich.
We're out of time. Any final thoughts? First of all, Sheldon, before we sign off, and then Rich.
Well, one final thought is I have to tell you, just from an aside, I'm sorry that you lost your mother. I know that she was well respected and she produced a great son, and I know how that has affected you. It's going to be 2 years of trying to heal this country, and I hope that we can start that process.
Richard, final thoughts.
My condolences, Henry. All my wishes to you and your family. Yeah, I agree. I would like to see some of the healing take place. It's going to be interesting to see what happens within our profession. You're going to start hearing talk about having family law positions be elected separate from circuit judge positions.
They should be.
I know, but then you're going to get into arguing. You're going to have all these specialty courts arguing the same thing. Landlord, tenant, to the business court, et cetera, et cetera. But I am very pleased with how the circuit court race ended, and that's not just because Shell's my friend, but Lori did a damn good job as a referee, and I think she'll be a damn good judge.
She'll be a great judge.
Yeah.
Gentlemen, we're out of time. As always, it's a pleasure having you. I want to thank you both for being my guests on Gracefully Graying. I want to thank our viewers for watching Gracefully Graying. Thank you again.